world is a constant battle between hope and fear. With every decision we make, with every thought we have about the future, the battle continues. Fear is the demon lurking around every corner, always present, always anxious to jump out at us whenever we try something new, in a savage attempt to keep us from ever doing anything interesting or achieving anything worthwhile. Even if it succeeds and we opt out of new or uncomfortable experiences altogether, it will never leave us alone. We may think initially that we can eliminate fear from our lives, but by doing so we find ourselves living waist-deep in it, as our comfort zone goes unchallenged and so gradually begins to shrink, until it hems us in close on every side. Ancient and modern philosophy from the school of positive thinking teaches us that hope is the natural antithesis of fear. We are taught that hope always overcomes fear. Hope is idolized and deified in art and fable as a small, yet powerful force for overcoming paralysis and despair in a world of shadow and treachery. In the legend of Pandora's box, we are told how humanity is tricked into opening a jar and releasing sickness, death, and misfortune into the world. Hope is the last thing to emerge from the jar, as a saving grace to humankind now destined to suffer so much. Thus we are presented with the idea that hope was given from the foundation of the world, that man might overcome the hardships and troubles therein. However, there is a problem with hope that we often do not discuss. What happens when hope is misguided or vain? We consider it obvious that we do not get everything we hope for, yet we hope all the same. Many of us hope for a secure financial future and a career that will fulfill us and make us happy, yet so many people are born and die in poverty, or spend the bulk of their lives in low-paying jobs doing tasks that are considered by society to be menial and tedious. Almost everyone hopes for the companionship of a person who they find exciting and attractive, a person who will love them for who they are through thick and thin. However, a general social survey conducted in 2018 discovered that 51% of Americans aged 18 to 34 claimed not to have a steady romantic partner, and the harsh reality is, some of them will likely die this way. Still, others anxiously await the day when they will find someone of their very own, only to realize finding such a someone that relationships are generally not at all in line with the expectations we get from television and media. When encountered with the often difficult task of making it work, many will become disillusioned and eventually opt out, or choose to stay in a relationship where they're perpetually unhappy, resolving to tough it out for the sake of the children, or to keep up appearances. Indeed, it seems that hope, at least in the way that we think of it, is no sort of guarantee for a brighter future. Even in the case of the infamous Pandora's box, the Greek word used for hope can also be translated as deceptive expectation. The Tao Te Ching is an ancient text said to have been written by a person by the name of Lao Tzu. Besides laying much of the groundwork of Taoist philosophy, it offers a different and surprising perspective into the matter of how we approach fear and hope. Chapter 13 of the Tao Te Ching is a great example of this and, like many ancient texts, yields slightly different insights depending on which translation is used. To illustrate this, we'll take a look first at the Jia Fu Feng translation of this passage, then at the translation by Stephen Mitchell. Accept disgrace willingly. Accept misfortune as the human condition. Misfortune comes from having a body. Without a body, how could there be misfortune? Surrender yourself humbly, then you can be trusted to care for all things. Love the world as your own self, then you can truly care for all things. This passage from the Tao Te Ching reminds us that misfortune and disappointment are nothing really more than par for the course when navigating our earthly experience. The funny thing is, most of us know this, but somehow we find it very easy to forget. We know that suffering is a part of life, and yet we act so surprised whenever it comes our way. What if, instead of hoping beyond hope that we can somehow manage to steer clear of misfortune, we could simply make peace with it? We know that there is almost a 100% chance each day that something will happen to us that we find unpleasant or disagreeable. So why not just accept that fact, and resolve to deal with it in the best way that we can when it inevitably comes up? Marcus Aurelius was an emperor of Rome, and one of, if not the most powerful man on the earth in his time. As such, he was forced to deal and work with many different types of people, many of whom tended to be extremely disagreeable and unpleasant. Marcus Aurelius' answer to this difficulty is both striking and informative. He would begin each day by saying to himself, "Today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness, all of them due to the offender's ignorance of what is good or evil." Instead of mentally agonizing about an extremely unpleasant task, which he certainly might have been justified in doing, he chose daily to accept and embrace the experience before him, and instead meditate on how he would respond to such people. Now for Stephen Mitchell's translation of the passage from the Tao Te Ching. Success is as dangerous as failure. Hope is as hollow as fear. Hope and fear are both phantoms that arise from thinking of the self. When we don't see the self as self, what do we have to fear? See the world as yourself. Have faith in the way things are. Love the world as yourself. Then you can care for all things. From the Stephen Mitchell translation, we understand that hope and fear, far from being opposites, are actually very much the same. Although they appear to be very different from each other, they are both born from the same basic process of feeling and thought. That is, the notion or desire to be in control of every part of our lives, and the idea that we ought to be exempt from any undesirable experience simply because we find it undesirable. Having this attitude, even subconsciously, not only sets us up for massive and repeated disappointment and frustration when things do not go our way, but also hinders us from progressing and getting better as human beings. Instead, we're much better served by letting go of the things we can't control, and choosing to focus our energies on the things we can control. One technique that can help in achieving this is a process used by author and public speaker Tim Ferriss, who, like Marcus Aurelius, is a student of Stoicism, an ancient Greek philosophy with many similarities to Taoism. Fear setting is the process of taking a mental inventory of everything that could possibly go wrong with a situation that you are finding yourself concerned about. After mentally playing through each undesirable scenario as viscerally as possible, it becomes much easier to then take a step back and realize that even if this terrible scenario were to come to pass, you would probably be able to recover and continue your life. For example, if I'm afraid of asking my boss for a raise, I can use fear setting to consider every possible result of doing so, good and bad. Best case scenario, I get the raise, possibly even more than I was counting on. The worst case scenario would be, of course, losing the job. And after imagining every potential possibility in as real and lifelike a way as I can muster, I can look at each undesirable scenario and ponder on whether or not they would really be as terrible and life-altering as I would assume them to be. In this example, even if I were to lose my job, odds are I would eventually be able to find a new one, and life would go on. Even in the case that I somehow became completely financially ruined and lost everything, I could learn to be happy, living a much simpler life. Once I have gone through each undesirable scenario in this way, I can now look at each one again, this time asking myself if there's anything I can do to increase the likelihood of the good scenarios playing out, while decreasing the likelihood of the bad ones. I could practice exactly what I'm going to say to my boss, or I can make a focused effort for the next several months to make myself that much more valuable to my company, in hopes that he will see my effort and reward it when I confront him. Doing this makes it much easier to then look over the situation as a whole and evaluate what to do from a logical and balanced perspective. The truth is, most things in our life are only as terrible or intolerable as we perceive them to be. Human beings are incredibly adaptable and can learn to be happy in nearly any circumstance. Although it is not realistic or wholesome to expect ourselves to be happy all the time, we can learn to make the best of whatever circumstance life throws at us. In a world plagued with misfortune and where outcomes are forever uncertain, we can learn to bend and flow with the currents of life and find peace in surrender.